All of us, at different times and in different ways, have been influenced by other people. Perhaps it's in the area of vocation, where someone really inspired you to take up a certain vocation. Perhaps it's in the area of activities, maybe hunting or fishing or mountain biking or kayaking. I'm sure none of you have been influenced in this area to curl or to play hockey. And by the way, I just want to make sure that it's known, contrary to popular belief, that children are not born Dallas Cowboy fans or Denver Bronco fans. They're influenced in that particular area. Or maybe it's in the area of ministry, perhaps. You've been really inspired by somebody, and so you're involved in youth ministry or music ministry or children's ministry or missions or just sharing your faith. I remember I can think that the way that I've been greatly influenced in the area of ministry was by a conversation I had about 20 years ago with an individual. In fact, it all started with a phone call, and I think, as I think back, maybe this was one of the most important phone calls that I've had in ministry. And so an individual, we're living in Pittsburgh at the time, and an individual called, and basically he said, and I couldn't understand him real well. I could tell he was from a different part of the country, a different part of the world. And he said, "I want to come to church. Will you come pick me up?" And so I thought, well, yeah, we'll absolutely. I'm sure you would have thought the same thing if someone called and say, "Hey, I need a ride to church," and didn't think anything of it. But as I went to this particular area of Pittsburgh to pick up this individual, my eyes were open really to a whole new world. This was an area of town that I was unaware of at this particular point. It was a place where there's about 1,000 units in a multi-housing facility, where there's people from the Middle East, people from West Africa, people from North Africa, really all over the world. And so, man, God just really spoke to us through that opportunity. And this individual's name is Nasser. He was a pastor in Sudan. And by the way, I've talked to him this past week, and he's given permission for me to share this information. But he was a pastor, came to the U.S. as a refugee, as well as a lot of these other folks, either political refugees or refugees related to their beliefs and practices and so forth. And so he was a guy that just really led other people and was enthusiastic and charismatic and really involved in all different kinds of ministry. And so he was the first person we met there, but then had the opportunity to do a lot of ministry in that particular area with ESL, English as a Second Language, really training. These folks came from refugee camps. There was no facilities, transportation, cooking classes, all those kinds of things, and obviously sharing the gospel. We had a number of teams that came from different places to do mission work there. And so just God really used that time in our lives to really minister to folks from all over the world. And so as we were working there, God just really spoke to my heart and just said, "Go to Africa. Just go to Africa." That was a clear word that I had. And so not knowing what to do, where to go, who to talk to, I just called our International Mission Board and said, "I want to go to Africa. How do I get there?" And so at that particular time, there was a conference taking place where the International Mission Board was bringing together pastors from the U.S., also pastors from Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya, as well as national pastors there. And we met at a place in Kenya called Brackenhurst. And so just a really eye-opening time, meeting people, hearing stories, hearing how God worked. And then the second week we were there, we were able to do ministry. And I went with a couple of missionaries who were serving in Kampala or Jinja, Uganda. And so, again, just God really revealing things that I'd never experienced, never known. And so it's one of those things you can talk about, pray about, hear about, see missions, but until you're there, you really don't get the impact that you would have otherwise. And so I remember returning back to the U.S. and God just really placing in my heart, you need to return to Africa, but don't come back by yourself. Bring some folks with you. And so we did that. And as a result of working with the individuals at this multi-housing complex called Prospect Park in Pittsburgh, many of them were from Sudan. And so they came from a refugee camp actually in the northern part of Kenya. And so as we returned to Kenya, we just really felt God calling us to go to this particular refugee camp and work in that area. Again, just a real unbelievable experience. The harshness of the conditions there, the climate, living in a refugee camp. There's about 100,000 people there. But we're able to work with pastors and work with people who were in the camp, share the gospel, and just really minister in that area. And I remember talking to an individual by the name of Samson Kasia, who was a leader in the Baptist Convention in Kenya, and just really an influential person, a person that a lot of people had a great deal of respect for. He was talking about the fact that missionaries had been in Kenya for a long time, and a lot of people had come to Kenya as far as mission trips. And so one of the things that he said to me, which I'll never forget, is, a lot of people come here. He was speaking of Kenya. A lot of people come to Kenya, but nobody comes to this place. And it just really opened my eyes, like nobody comes to this really hard place. And then I thought back about a conversation I had with Nasser in Pittsburgh, because when I talked to him after we began to work together, I said, I'm curious, you called us at our church, and I'm just wondering why you called us instead of a number of other churches in Pittsburgh. And he said, well, because our church started with a P, and so it was the 16th letter, I believe, in the alphabet. And so he said, well, I called a number of other churches, but no one would come and pick us up. And that's another statement that I shall never forget. I called a number of other churches, but no one would pick us up. A lot of people come to this country, but no one comes to this place because it's hard. Then I had another conversation with a pastor in another state, and we were talking about, it was a pastor of a fairly large church. We were talking about missions and some of the opportunities and experiences that we had had, and just some of the things in refugee camp. Tons of stories. Don't have time to tell them all. But I shall never forget what he said to me. He said, we do mission trips. We take people on mission trips, but we don't want to go to places that are, he said this, these are his exact words, we don't want to go to places that are too hard. We want to make sure that when we go someplace, we see results. And so those three things, those three ideas have really kind of formed my idea in thinking about missions. Number one is, like, we would never want to be a church. I would never want to be an individual who, when someone called and said, I need help. No, we can't help you. I need food. No, we can't give you food. I need a ride to church. No, we can't pick you up. We would never want to be a church or an individual who said, we're not going to go to hard places, and difficult places, and harsh places. We would never want to be a people or an individual who said, man, this is not really convenient, and we want to make sure that we see things happen. And maybe it's the same people that get baptized year after year after year when people come to those places and make it easy for them. And so going back and thinking about Nasser, he's the kind of individual that just really wanted to be where people were hurting and suffering and needed the gospel, needed Jesus. And so he called me up one day and said, Pastor, I'm moving, which was really like disheartening to me. Like, I'm going to Tennessee. There's a lot of Sudanese in Tennessee. And so as we kept in contact, I discovered like weekly he would travel between Memphis and Nashville, starting churches in both areas. Every single Sunday he'd go back and forth and travel there. Now he's going back and forth to to Sudan and to North Africa. So what I'd like to do is just show a few pictures of some of the experiences that he's having now and just share a few requests of prayer for those guys. So the first picture that you see is a primary school in the region called Yidda. This is another refugee camp, and there's a population of about 100,000 people there. And the second picture is a picture of Nasser preaching at the Baptist church there. They call it First Baptist Church in Yidda. We had a similar experience that you see in the third picture with the baptism at this church. It's kind of a place where you kind of dig a hole, hopefully can find a tarp someplace and find some water and put it in it and get somebody under the waters as much as you possibly can. And so, again, a harsh region. The third picture, we see a classroom at a church in Yambio in South Sudan. And another situation where people come from near and far and just come and sit on wooden benches. These are children here, but adults the same way. Again, in harsh conditions. More baptisms in the next picture in the Baptist church in a place called Wild City. This particular day, 45 people were baptized in the Jur River. Then this last picture took place at an area that I'm not going to name with many individuals who had a Muslim background. So, man, God is really at work in these places, and I just am so appreciative of the opportunity that I've had to meet Nasser. And I would just like to share a couple of prayer requests with you. Nasser requested that we pray for the churches, pray for new believers. There's not really the systems that we have of discipleship and so forth, so really praying for leadership to be developed in these areas that can really disciple and minister to people. Right now, in a lot of places in Africa and other places in the world, certainly they're experiencing food shortages. In fact, starvation is happening in a lot of places. We're not hearing a lot about that because of all the things that are going on in our own country. But he's asked to pray for our churches and pray for these cities that he's been working in, particularly Cairo is a place where they're really experiencing a lot of food shortage. So your prayers would be greatly appreciated. And just think about the people that have influenced your life and really the opportunities that you have today to influence others.